Have you ever noticed the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening? Not the words you say out loud, but the quiet voice in your mind, the one that never really stops. What does it sound like? Is it patient with you, or is it constantly pointing out what's wrong? Does it support you, or does it remind you of every mistake you've ever made? Because if you slow down for a moment and really listen, you might realize something uncomfortable. That voice isn't always kind. It questions you when you're already unsure. It criticizes you when you're already hurting. It tells you to be careful, to hold back, to not try too hard, just in case you fail again. And the strangest part is, you've heard it for so long, it almost feels normal. Like background noise. Like something you just have to live with. But what if that voice is shaping more than just your thoughts? What if it's quietly influencing your confidence, your decisions, your energy, even the way life responds to you? Think about it. How many times have you stopped yourself before even trying? How many times have you assumed the worst, before anything even happened? How often have you talked yourself out of something that could have changed everything? Not because you weren't capable, but because something inside you said, "This won't work." And you believed it. Without questioning it. Without challenging it. Without even realizing that it wasn't truth. It was just a pattern. A pattern that repeats, day after day, moment after moment. Quietly shaping how you see yourself, and what you expect from life. And over time, those expectations begin to feel real. Limitations start to feel permanent. Doubt starts to feel logical. Holding back starts to feel safe. But deep down, there's a part of you that knows something isn't right. Because there are moments, small ones, where you feel a different kind of voice trying to come through. A calmer one. A stronger one. A voice that doesn't panic, doesn't criticize, doesn't shrink. But it gets drowned out by the louder, more familiar one. And so you stay stuck. Not because you don't want more, but because the conversation inside you never really changed. So let me ask you something, honestly. If someone spoke to you, the way you speak to yourself, every single day, would you feel stronger, or weaker? Would you feel ready for life? Or already defeated before it even begins? Because maybe, just maybe, the most important conversation you're having right now is the one no one else can hear. There is something important you need to understand, and you need to feel it, not just hear it. This isn't your fault. The way you speak to yourself right now, the tone, the doubts, the hesitation, it didn't just appear one day. You didn't wake up and decide to question your worth or limit your own potential. This pattern was built, slowly, quietly, over time. And most of it happened without your awareness. Think back for a moment. Every environment you've ever been part of, every voice you've listened to, every reaction you received when you tried, failed, succeeded, or simply expressed yourself, it all left an impression. Sometimes it was obvious. A harsh comment. A moment of embarrassment. A time when you were made to feel like you weren't enough. But more often, it was subtle. The expectations you felt but were never explained. The approval you had to earn. The silence when you needed encouragement the most. The comparison you didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. And without realizing it, your mind started learning. It started observing what gets accepted, and what gets rejected. It started building a system, not for growth, but for protection. Because your mind has always had one primary goal, to keep you safe. Not successful. Not fulfilled. Safe. So it created patterns. Patterns that say, don't try too much, you might fail. Don't speak too confidently, you might be judged. Don't expect too much, you might be disappointed. And at some point, those patterns stopped sounding like outside voices, and started sounding like you. That's how powerful conditioning is. It doesn't just influence your thoughts, it becomes your inner voice. And once that happens, you stop questioning it. You assume it's truth. But it's not. It's learned. There's a big difference. Because if something is learned, it can also be unlearned. But before that can happen, you need to release one heavy weight you might not even realize you're carrying. Blame. Blaming yourself for thinking this way. Blaming yourself for not being confident enough. Blaming yourself for overthinking, hesitating, holding back. That blame keeps the cycle alive. Because the moment you judge yourself for your thoughts, you create even more negative thoughts. It becomes a loop. You doubt yourself, then judge yourself for doubting, then feel even worse, then doubt even more. And it never really ends. So instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" there's a better question. What did I learn that made me think this way? That question changes everything. Because now, you're not broken. You're conditioned. And conditioning can change. Gently. Gradually. Without force. You don't need to fight your mind. You don't need to silence every negative thought. You don't need to become someone completely different overnight. You just need to understand what's been happening beneath the surface. Your mind has been trying to protect you, using outdated instructions. Instructions that were formed in moments when you didn't have the awareness you have now. And those instructions are still running, even if they no longer serve you. That's why sometimes, you react in ways you don't fully understand. You hesitate when you want to move forward. You pull back when things start going well. You expect problems, even in calm situations. It's not weakness. It's programming. And the moment you see it that way, something begins to shift. Because you stop taking every thought personally. You stop believing every doubt automatically. You create a small space between you and that voice. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Awareness. And awareness is where change begins. Not force. Not pressure. Not trying to fix yourself. Just awareness. The kind that notices, without judging. The kind that observes, without reacting immediately. Because when you start observing your inner voice, you begin to realize something surprising. Not every thought deserves your trust. Not every sentence in your mind is true. Some of it is just repetition. Old patterns, replaying themselves. And for the first time, you can choose not to follow them blindly. This is where emotional safety starts to return. Because instead of feeling controlled by your thoughts, you begin to feel separate from them. You begin to see that you are not the voice. You are the one hearing it. And that changes the entire experience. Because once you are aware, you are no longer trapped. You're simply at the beginning of something new. A different kind of relationship with your own mind. One that isn't based on fear, or pressure, or constant correction. But understanding. And from that understanding, something important starts to grow. Not forced confidence. Not fake positivity. But a quiet sense of stability. The kind that doesn't come from outside validation. But from knowing that you don't have to believe everything your mind says anymore. And that alone is the first real step toward change. Most people never realize where things actually start going wrong. They think the problem is out there. In their circumstances. In other people. In missed opportunities, bad timing, or lack of resources. So they try to fix everything externally. They push harder. They set bigger goals. They look for motivation, discipline, strategies, something that will finally make things work. And for a while, it feels like progress. But then something strange happens. They start strong, and slowly lose momentum. They get close, and then pull back. They make improvements, but nothing truly changes at the core. And they can't explain why. Because from the outside, it looks like they're doing everything right. But internally, something is still working against them. Here's the part most people miss. It's not just what you do. It's what you're quietly saying to yourself while you're doing it. Because you can take all the right actions. and still carry the wrong internal message. You can work hard, while thinking, this probably won't work. You can show up consistently, while feeling, I'm not really good enough. You can chase opportunities, while believing, this isn't meant for me. And that contradiction creates resistance. Not visible resistance, but internal resistance. And internal resistance is powerful. Because it doesn't stop you immediately. It slows you down, redirects you, drains your energy, clouds your decisions. Until eventually, you either give up, or settle. And then you assume, it just wasn't meant to happen. But what if it wasn't the action that failed? It was the message behind it? Think about how most people deal with negative thoughts. They fight them. They try to ignore them. They try to silence them. They distract themselves. They replace them with forced positive affirmations that don't feel real. I'm confident. I'm successful. I can do anything. But deep down, something doesn't agree. There's a quiet voice that says, no, you're not. And now you have two voices, pulling in opposite directions. That creates tension. And the more you try to force positivity, the stronger that resistance becomes. Because your mind doesn't respond to words alone. It responds to what feels true. This is where most people get stuck. They believe the solution is to control their thoughts completely. But that approach often makes things worse. Because now you're not only dealing with doubt. You're also frustrated with yourself for having doubt. So instead of one problem, you've created two. And both are feeding each other. Here's another mistake that goes unnoticed. People think awareness alone is enough. They start observing their thoughts, noticing patterns, becoming more conscious. And that's powerful, but incomplete. Because if awareness doesn't lead to a shift in direction, it can turn into overthinking. You start analyzing every thought, questioning every feeling, trying to figure everything out. And instead of feeling clearer, you feel even more overwhelmed. So you go back to distractions. Scrolling. Working more. Keeping yourself busy, just to avoid that internal noise. But the pattern remains. Because the core hasn't changed. Then there's another subtle trap. Waiting to feel ready. I'll change my thinking when I feel more confident. I'll believe in myself when I see results. I'll speak differently to myself when things start improving. But it never works that way. Because the way you speak to yourself is what shapes how you feel in the first place. So you end up waiting for a feeling that depends on a change you haven't made yet. It's a loop. And it keeps repeating. All of these patterns have one thing in common. They focus on the surface, while ignoring the source. They treat the symptoms, but never address what's quietly driving everything underneath. Your inner dialogue. Not just the words, but the tone, the belief, the emotional weight behind those words. Because that's what your mind is actually responding to. And when that inner dialogue stays the same, your external efforts can only take you so far. This is why change feels temporary for so many people. They improve their habits, but not their inner language. They change their environment, but not their internal message. They adjust their actions, but not their identity. So eventually, everything pulls them back to where they started. Not because they're incapable, but because the foundation hasn't shifted. And here's the most important part. None of this is obvious. It doesn't feel like self-sabotage. It feels like reality. It feels logical to doubt when things are uncertain. It feels reasonable to expect failure after past experiences. It feels natural to be cautious, to hold back, to protect yourself. But what feels natural is often just familiar. And familiarity doesn't always lead to growth. It leads to repetition. The same patterns. The same reactions. The same results. Over and over again. Until something deeper changes. Not your effort. Not your environment. But the way you relate to yourself. In the quiet moments, when no one else is there. Because that's where everything begins. And that's also where most people never think to look. There is a principle operating in your life right now, whether you are aware of it or not. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. But it quietly shapes how things unfold, day after day, moment after moment. Most people spend years trying to change their life without ever understanding this. And that's why their efforts feel inconsistent. Sometimes things work. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes progress appears, and then disappears just as quickly. It feels unpredictable. But it isn't. There is a pattern beneath all of it. A law that doesn't respond to effort alone, but to something far more subtle. Something internal. Joseph Murphy spoke about this in a very simple but powerful way. He said that life does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you believe to be true. Not surface-level belief. Not something you repeat a few times and hope for the best. But the kind of belief that feels natural, automatic, unquestioned. The kind of belief that lives beneath your awareness. And quietly influences everything. This is where the subconscious mind comes in. Not as something mysterious or distant. But as a system that is always listening. Always absorbing. Always responding. It doesn't argue with you. It doesn't judge. It doesn't filter your thoughts to decide what's good or bad. It simply accepts and acts. Whatever you consistently give it. It begins to treat as instruction. And over time, it organizes your perceptions, your reactions, and even your opportunities around that instruction. That's the part most people overlook. They think their thoughts are just passing moments. Something temporary. Something that doesn't really matter unless they act on it. But from the perspective of this principle, repetition matters more than intensity. A thought repeated calmly, consistently, has more influence than a thought repeated with force, but filled with doubt. Because the subconscious doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to familiarity. What feels normal becomes accepted. What becomes accepted begins to shape your reality. And this is happening all the time. Not just when you sit down to think positively. Not just when you try to motivate yourself. But in the quiet, unnoticed moments. When something goes wrong, and you say, "Of course this happened." When you hesitate, and think, "I'm not ready for this." When you see an opportunity, and immediately assume, "This isn't for me." Those small sentences. Those quick, almost automatic responses. They carry weight. Because they are honest. They are not forced. They are not filtered. They reflect what you actually expect. And expectation is powerful. More powerful than effort alone. Because effort can push you forward. But expectation determines how far you allow yourself to go. If you expect things to go wrong, you prepare for problems, even when none are there. If you expect rejection, you hold back, even when acceptance is possible. If you expect failure, you approach everything with tension, hesitation, doubt. And that internal state influences your actions in ways you don't always see. Your tone changes. Your decisions shift. Your energy feels different. And people respond to that. Situations respond to that. Not because of something mystical or unrealistic. But because your internal state is shaping your external behavior. And your behavior influences outcomes. This is the bridge between thought and reality. It's not about controlling every thought perfectly. It's about understanding which thoughts you are consistently accepting as true. Because once something is accepted internally, it begins to express itself externally. This is why two people can face the same situation and experience completely different results. One approaches it with quiet certainty. The other approaches it with hidden doubt. And even if their actions look similar, the outcome often isn't. Because beneath the surface, their inner instructions are different. One is aligned. The other is conflicted. And alignment creates flow, while conflict creates resistance. This principle doesn't judge you for having doubt. It doesn't punish you for thinking negatively. It simply reflects what is repeated. That's all. And once you understand that, you begin to see your inner dialogue differently. Not as random thoughts, but as patterns that are shaping direction. Not as harmless self-talk, but as quiet instructions being reinforced over time. This is where awareness deepens. Because now, you're not just noticing your thoughts. You're recognizing their influence. You're seeing how something as simple as a repeated sentence can slowly become a belief, and how that belief can quietly guide your life. But there's still something missing. Because understanding the principle is not the same as applying it. You can know all of this and still continue the same patterns. You can recognize the problem and still feel stuck in it. Because the real shift doesn't happen when you understand the law. It happens when you start using it intentionally. And that's where everything begins to change. Not in a dramatic, overwhelming way, but in something much simpler. Something you've been doing your entire life, without realizing its power. The way you speak to yourself. Now we can finally bring everything together. Not as a theory. Not as an idea to think about. But as something real, something you can actually see in your own life. Because the truth is simple. The way you talk to yourself is the way your life begins to respond to you. Not sometimes. Not only in certain situations. But consistently. Quietly. Over time. Your inner voice is not just describing your reality. It is shaping it. Every sentence you repeat internally, especially the ones that feel natural, becomes a kind of instruction. And your mind listens. It doesn't stop and ask, "Is this good for you?" It doesn't question your tone or your intention. It accepts, and it reflects. That's why this matters more than anything else you've tried. Because you're not just changing words. You're changing direction. Think about it this way. If your inner voice constantly says, "This is hard. I can't handle this, things never work out for me," then even if you take action, you're moving with resistance. You hesitate. You doubt your decisions. You expect problems. And without realizing it, you begin to act in ways that confirm those expectations. But the moment that internal conversation shifts, everything starts to move differently. Not because the world suddenly changes overnight, but because you do. And that changes how you show up. Here's the real shift. You stop reacting to your thoughts and start choosing them. Instead of letting your mind run automatic patterns, you begin to guide it, calmly, intentionally. Not by forcing positivity. Not by pretending everything is perfect. But by speaking to yourself in a way that creates stability. A way that feels grounded, believable, steady. For example, instead of saying, "I can't do this," you say, "I'm learning how to handle this." Instead of, "This always goes wrong," you say, "I'm figuring this out step by step." Instead of, "I'm not ready," you say, "I'm becoming ready as I move forward." Notice the difference. These aren't exaggerated statements. They don't try to convince you of something unrealistic. They guide you, without creating resistance. And that's the key. Because your mind doesn't respond to words that feel fake. It responds to words that feel possible. That feel calm. That feel certain, even in a small way. And when you repeat those kinds of sentences, something begins to shift internally. Your body relaxes. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your reactions become more controlled. You stop spiraling as quickly. You start pausing, instead of reacting. And in that pause, you create space. Space to choose differently. This is where your power actually is. Not in controlling every thought, but in redirecting the ones that matter most. The ones you repeat. The ones you believe. The ones you emotionally attach to. Because those are the ones that shape your state. And your state shapes your actions. And your actions shape your results. It all connects. But here's something even deeper. It's not just what you say to yourself. It's how you say it. The tone matters. If you speak to yourself with pressure, your mind feels tension. If you speak to yourself with calm certainty, your mind feels safe. And when your mind feels safe, it becomes more open, more focused, more responsive. That's when real change begins. Not from force, but from alignment. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're working with yourself. Guiding your thoughts instead of chasing them. And over time, this becomes natural. Just like the old patterns once were. Because repetition builds familiarity. And familiarity becomes identity. At first, it might feel unfamiliar to speak to yourself this way. It might feel like you're interrupting something automatic. And you are. You're interrupting a pattern that's been running for years. So of course it takes time. But every time you choose a different sentence, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. Every time you pause and redirect, you create a new reference point. And those small moments add up. Until one day, your default voice starts to change. It becomes calmer, more supportive, more steady. Not perfect, but different. And that difference changes everything. Because now, when life challenges you, you don't collapse internally. You respond differently. You think differently. You move differently. And as a result, you experience different outcomes. Not because you forced them, but because you aligned with something deeper. This is the real meaning behind the shift. Talk to yourself like this, and watch your life change. It's not about magic. It's not about instant transformation. It's about something far more powerful. Consistency, awareness, and intentional direction. Because the conversation happening inside you is not just background noise. It's the foundation. And the moment you start changing that foundation, everything built on top of it begins to change too. Let me share something that will make this even more real. Because understanding the principle is one thing. Seeing it in your life, witnessing it work, is something else entirely. I've seen it happen countless times. Not in theory, not in books, not as an abstract idea. But in real lives, in everyday situations. There was a man I worked with, let's call him David. David was struggling with his career. He was competent, talented, and hardworking. But no matter how much effort he put in, nothing seemed to stick. Promotions passed him by. Opportunities disappeared. His confidence was fading fast. When we sat down to look at what was really happening, it wasn't his skills or his strategy that was the issue. It was his inner voice. Every morning, before he even faced the world, he'd think, "I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. This won't work." Those sentences were quiet, almost imperceptible. But they were constant. And they were shaping his reality more than any effort he was making. We started small. Every time he noticed that voice, he paused. Instead of saying, "I can't do this," he replaced it with, "I am learning. I am capable of handling this step by step. At first, it felt awkward. At first, it didn't feel like it would matter. But within weeks, David began to notice subtle shifts. He spoke up in meetings. He approached challenges differently. He didn't panic when something didn't go perfectly. And before long, opportunities that had seemed impossible began appearing. Promotions, new projects, recognition. Not because he suddenly worked harder, but because he approached life differently, because he had changed his internal conversation. Then there was a woman, Sarah, facing anxiety in her personal life. Every night, her mind ran through fears. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if I make the wrong choice? We started working on her inner dialogue. Not with affirmations she didn't believe. Not with forced positivity. But with calm, believable statements. I am figuring this out. I can handle what comes. I trust myself to make the best choice I can. She repeated these sentences softly during the quiet moments of her day when she felt doubt creeping in. Within a month, the panic attacks she had been experiencing reduced. Within 2 months, she felt a confidence she hadn't had in years. Her relationships shifted. Her ability to make decisions improved. Her life began responding to her in ways that felt effortless. And it wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It wasn't because she suddenly became a different person. It was because she had aligned her inner voice with what she wanted her life to reflect. Here's another example, this one from a student I coached. He struggled with procrastination. Every time he sat down to study, his thoughts would whisper, "I'll never understand this. This is too hard. I'm not smart enough." We began noticing the sentences together. And we changed them. Not by overthinking or forcing motivation, but by shifting the tone. I am capable of learning this. I take it step by step. I am improving with every effort. The change wasn't immediate. At first, he still hesitated. But over weeks, his study sessions became smoother. He completed tasks he had been avoiding for months. His grades improved. But more importantly, his confidence in himself grew. Notice a pattern in all these examples? It isn't dramatic. It isn't sudden. It isn't about grand declarations or extreme effort. It's about repetition. It's about consistent alignment between thought and feeling. It's about choosing sentences that are believable, calm, and certain. These are real people, living real lives, facing real struggles. And the changes weren't accidental. They were the natural result of guiding the inner voice. Think about your own life for a moment. What conversations are running in the background of your mind? Which ones support you, and which ones hold you back? Now imagine what would happen if you began applying this principle. If you noticed the sentences that undermine you, and gently replaced them with calm, believable statements that support growth. What would shift? It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to feel forced. Even small sentences repeated consistently. Even small moments of awareness can completely transform the way your life unfolds. The key is observation. The key is patience. The key is calm consistency. You don't have to rewrite everything at once. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to start noticing and start guiding. Because once you do, the subconscious begins listening. It begins to absorb the new instruction. It begins to shape your actions, your choices, and your experiences around it. And life starts to respond. Not magically. Not overnight. But in very real, noticeable ways. That's the proof. Not theory. Not hope. Not promises. Real people. Real changes. Real life responding differently. Simply because of the way they began talking to themselves. And here's the most important lesson from all of it. You don't have to wait for life to change first. You don't have to wait for circumstances, resources, or validation. You begin with one thing: the sentences you allow in your mind, the tone you use, the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. Do that consistently, and the proof will follow. Because the principle is universal, and the result is inevitable. Your inner voice shapes your outer life. And when you guide it wisely, life begins to respond differently. In ways that feel natural, effortless, and lasting. Now it's time to make this usable in your daily life. Not as theory, not as abstract ideas, but as practical steps you can take every day, starting right now. Because knowledge alone won't change anything. Understanding the principle is powerful, yes, but application is what transforms your life. The first step is simple, yet it requires awareness. Begin noticing the sentences running through your mind. Not in a judgmental way, not with criticism, but with gentle observation. For example, when you feel hesitation, stress, or doubt creeping in, pause and listen. What is your mind telling you? What is the tone? How does it make you feel? The moment you notice it, you create space. This space is where change begins. Next, gently interrupt the unhelpful sentence. You don't need to force anything. You don't need to argue with your mind or convince yourself of something that feels untrue. Instead, replace the sentence with something calm, believable, and aligned with the reality you want to create. For instance, if the voice says, "I'm not ready," you might replace it with, "I am becoming ready step by step." If it says, "I always fail," you can change it to, "I am learning, and each step brings me closer." These sentences are not about false positivity. They are about quiet certainty. The third step is repetition. This is the bridge between intention and reality. The subconscious mind doesn't respond to single events, it responds to consistent messages. Every time you replace an unhelpful sentence with a deliberate, calm instruction, you strengthen a new pattern. At first, it will feel unfamiliar. The old voice is strong because it has been running for years. That's why patience is essential. Change is not instant. The key is consistency, not intensity. Over time, the new sentences will feel natural, and the old patterns will lose power. Another important step is tone. It is not just what you say, but how you say it internally. A sentence said with tension or pressure creates resistance, even if the words are positive. A sentence spoken with calm authority, believable and gentle, creates alignment. Practice speaking to yourself in this tone. Imagine the voice as a trusted guide, not a critic. When your mind hears calm certainty, it relaxes, opens up, and begins to respond differently. Situational practice is essential. Begin applying this in everyday moments where you feel hesitation, fear, or doubt. Before making a decision, notice the internal dialogue. Before responding to a challenge, notice what your mind is saying. When facing uncertainty, pause and direct the conversation internally. These small moments are the most powerful because they happen frequently and cumulatively. Each one is an opportunity to reinforce the new pattern. Journaling can also help. Write down the sentences that dominate your internal dialogue. Observe them, then rewrite them in the calm, certain way you want to internalize. This externalizes the process, making it tangible, and reinforces your awareness. Over time, you will notice a shift not just in your thoughts, but in your confidence, decisions, and actions. Another practical tool is daily affirmation through quiet reflection. Not forced affirmations, but gentle statements repeated when your mind is calm, such as early morning or before sleep. For example, I am capable of handling what comes. I am learning. I am aligned with my best actions. Repeating these sentences consistently guides your subconscious toward stability and action, creating internal alignment that naturally reflects in your outer life. Finally, integrate small reminders throughout the day. When stress arises, when doubt creeps in, or when you feel resistance, take a mental pause. Repeat a guiding sentence. Speak it to yourself calmly. This doesn't have to be long or complicated. A single sentence, repeated with consistency and calmness, will begin shifting your inner conversation over time. These moments are cumulative. They reinforce the new voice, weaken the old patterns, and gradually create a life that responds to your internal alignment. Remember, the power is in your hands because your inner dialogue is continuous. It is constant. It is always shaping how you perceive yourself, how you respond to life, and how life responds to you. Using these steps: awareness, gentle interruption, repetition, tone, situational practice, journaling, and quiet daily reflection, you take control of that process. You guide it consciously rather than allowing unconscious patterns to dictate your outcomes. The result is subtle at first. You will notice small shifts, less tension, clearer decisions, improved reactions, and more confidence. But over time, these small shifts compound into profound changes. You stop overreacting to challenges. You stop doubting yourself before you even try. You begin to act in ways that reflect your potential. And life begins to mirror that inner alignment. This is how you apply the principle practically. Not with force. Not with expectation of immediate results. But with patience, calm authority, and daily consistency. Every small moment counts. Every internal sentence you guide intentionally contributes to a new pattern, a new reality, and a stronger version of yourself. Begin today. Notice the voice. Pause. Replace. Repeat. Breathe. Observe. Stay consistent. Speak calmly. And watch as, gradually, your life begins responding to the voice you've chosen to trust and guide.